3 days into the 11th month of the year, you found CNN Student News. I'm Carl Azus at the CNN Center. First up, U.S. President Barack Obama wants changes made to America's criminal justice system. Yesterday, he announced new government actions intended to help rehabilitate U.S. prisoners and help them get their lives back on track after their time is served. His announcement came as the U.S. government wrapped up its early release of 6,000 federal prisoners. It was the largest release of its kind in American history. The president's also calling on Congress to change prison sentencing laws for people who've committed nonviolent drug crimes. It's part of an effort to decrease the U.S. prison population. His actions come at a time when the use of certain drugs, especially heroin, has increased in recent years. And some officials, like the head of New York City's police department, say the government needs to be cautious about the people it releases from prison. He says many inmates go to jail with negotiated charges, meaning some might have committed violent crimes. They're just not specifically serving time for them. The U.S. Geological Survey says the first earthquake that hit just before 9 p.m. was magnitude 3.2. The second, 2.5 hours later, was stronger, magnitude 4.1. The third, 20 minutes after that, 4.0. This wouldn't have been breaking news in San Francisco, maybe, but this series of quakes was felt in Phoenix, Arizona, pretty far removed from the West Coast's major fault lines. There wasn't any major damage. Quakes of these magnitudes are felt, pictures may sway, plates may fall, but they're not usually very destructive. Still, local residents were shaken up. U.S. scientists are finding there's potential for these well beyond Phoenix.
You may think that people living on the West Coast are the only ones at risk of an earthquake, but that's far from the truth. In fact, the USGS just released new research that states nearly half of all Americans are at risk from damaging shaking due to earthquakes. One reason is that population has grown significantly in some of these areas more prone to earthquakes. But also scientists have improved their capabilities of estimating where these danger zones are. So which states have the strongest shaking potential? California, Washington, Utah, Tennessee, Oregon, South Carolina, Nevada, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois. You may be surprised at how many East Coast states are on the list. Well, scientists learned a lot from the Virginia earthquake in 2011. They say that a stronger earthquake is possible, specifically stating Charleston, South Carolina is at risk. New York City, you had a little good news. The threat is down from slower shaking, which causes more damage to taller buildings, versus fast shaking, which does more damage to shorter structures. Even with this new information, there's still a threat. California has always been known for their risk of earthquakes, and that hasn't changed. In fact, the risk has actually gone up for Southern California as well as the Bay Area. And then there's the Pacific Northwest. The Cascadia subduction zone has the potential to produce an earthquake with a magnitude up to 9.3. This was discovered by studying the 2011 earthquake in Japan and the 2014 earthquake in Chile. Both occurred along subduction zones similar to the Northwest Zone. Whether you live right along a fault or not, you may still be at risk of feeling the shaking from an earthquake.
Not all journalists disclose their sources, but we do on our roll call. Each day's transcript page at cnnstudentnews.com. Essex Middle School knows about this. Great to see the Eagles today from Essex, Vermont. How about Fairfield Area High School? It's always nighttime, y'all, in Fairfield, Pennsylvania. And from the capital of Turkey, that's Ankara, we heard from Guchaj High School yesterday. Thank you for watching. In northwestern Iraq, a battle is looming. There's a town there called Sinjar. It's not far from the Iraqi border with Syria. And in August of last year, Sinjar was overrun by the ISIS terrorist group. It's an important strategic location because it sits between Mosul, an ISIS-controlled city in Iraq, and Raqqa, an ISIS-controlled city in Syria. But Kurdish Peshmerga forces, who've been battling ISIS in a number of places in the Middle East, are getting ready to take Sinjar back. And they've enlisted the help of about 5,000 Yazidis. They're a religious minority group that's been an ongoing target for ISIS.
ISIS view one religious group in particular as infidels. They have a great deal of hatred for a religious group called the Yazidis. ISIS has worked deliberately to enslave, capture, and to kill members of the Yazidi religious faith. They don't consider them to be a religion of the book. ISIS actually has more respect for Christians and Jews because the Quran recognizes those religions as being precursors of Islam.
These are the people of Sinjar now. These are the Yazidis trapped here.
As ISIS moved forward, one of the areas they moved into was Sinjar, that had hundreds of thousands of members of the Yazidi faith living in it. And those people were particularly terrified.
We're flying over ISIS front lines right now.
There have been accounts gathered by Yazidi activists that perhaps more than 3,000 Yazidi men and boys were executed in various massacres by ISIS. ISIS also took thousands of people hostage, and many of these people are women and girls. According to Yazidi activists that I've talked to, many of the children were forced to attend Islamic schools and begin Muslim prayers 5 times a day. As some Yazidi activists have put it, ISIS is bringing back practices of slavery to the modern day era, and they've imposed this modern day slavery on some of these innocent Yazidi civilians now for more than a year.
Here's what investigators know about Kogalamavia Flight 9268 that crashed in part of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula Saturday. It was cruising at more than 30,000 feet when it disappeared from radar. It was about 23 minutes into its flight from Egypt to Russia. It broke into pieces before it hit the ground. A Kogalamavia executive said yesterday that the only reasonable explanation for the crash was an external influence. He didn't explain what that meant. But other officials say it's too early to know for sure what happened. They have recovered and they're decoding the plane's flight and voice data recorders.
Following a plane crash, the search for survivors always comes first. But just as important is the search for answers, the why and the how. Often those answers are found in the black box. Since the 60s, all commercial airplanes have been required to have one on board. Now, the name is a little misleading because they're actually orange, and when we're talking about a black box, we're talking about 2 different boxes, one being the cockpit voice recorder, the other being the flight data recorder. Together, they weigh anywhere between 20 to 30 pounds, and they have to be crash-proof. Black boxes can survive just about anything, temperatures up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour, forces that are 3,400 Gs. Now, that's 3,400 times the force of gravity. They're waterproof, and they can save recorded data for 2 years. And it's a lot of data. The cockpit voice recorder records the crew's conversation and background noise. By listening to the ambient sounds in a cockpit before a crash, experts can determine if a stall took place, the RPMs of the engine, and the speed at which the plane was traveling. When these sounds are cross-referenced with ground control conversations, they can even help searchers locate a crash site. Then there's the flight data recorder. It gathers 25 hours of technical data from airplane sensors, recording several thousand discrete pieces of information. Data about the airspeed, altitude, pitch, acceleration, roll, fuel, and the list goes on and on.
If you're scared of lightning, this'll make you jump. A National Weather Service technician was recording a recent storm. He was indoors, where we should be during a thunderstorm, but this was a little close. Yeah, told you, a lightning bolt nailed a weather radar tower, and it did some damage at a time when storms were contributing to flash flooding in Brownsville, Texas. Fortunately, the technician was okay, though he probably considered lighting out of the area. The enlightening lightning video is not to be taken lightly. It sheds light on an illuminating subject, brightening our concept of nature's light show and electrifying our coverage of current events. I'm Carl Azus, and CNN Student News is Lights Out.